Never rush back home when family calls crying about a medical emergency until you verify it yourself. Because what I discovered when I got there was far worse than any heart attack could ever be. My name is Barbara Martinez, and I'm about to tell you how my own family tried to steal my inheritance by faking my father's death. But here's the thing, I saw right through their plan and turned the tables in a way that left them speechless. You should have seen their faces when I dropped the bomb that shut the whole room up. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday when my phone rang. I was in my home office in Seattle, working late on a client presentation. The number showed my sister Maria's contact, but the voice on the other end was barely recognizable through the hysteric sobbing. "Barbara! Oh my God, Barbara, you need to come home right now!" Maria's voice cracked between gasps. "It's Dad. He's had a massive heart attack. The doctors, they don't know if he's going to make it through the night." My blood ran cold. Despite the complicated relationship I had with my family, hearing about my father's condition hit me like a physical blow. I could hear other voices in the background, my mother crying, my brother, James, talking rapidly to someone, the sterile sounds of what I assumed was a hospital. "What hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my laptop to book the first flight back to Phoenix. "How bad is it? What are the doctors saying exactly?" "St. Joseph's," Maria choked out. "Barbara, it's really bad. He collapsed at dinner and Mom is falling apart. We need you here. We need the whole family together right now. I hadn't been home in over a year." After building my consulting business in Seattle, I'd deliberately kept my distance from the family dynamics that had driven me away in the first place. But this was different. This was life or death. "I'm booking a flight right now," I told her, my fingers already flying across the keyboard. "I can be there by morning. Tell Dad I'm coming, okay? Tell him to hold on." The flight was the longest 6 hours of my life. I kept thinking about all the things left unsaid between my father and me. Sure, we'd had our differences. He never understood why I left Phoenix, why I chose career over staying close to family, why I didn't visit more often. But underneath all that, he was still my dad. What I didn't know during that sleepless flight was that my father was perfectly fine, probably sleeping peacefully in his own bed. What I didn't know was that 3 members of my family were huddled together at that very moment, going over their plan one final time, making sure every detail was perfect for when I walked into their trap. I landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor at 6:23 a.m. and took the first Uber straight to St. Joseph's Hospital. The driver tried to make small talk, but I was too anxious, too focused on getting to my father's bedside. I kept checking my phone for updates, but there were no new messages from Maria or James. Walking through those hospital corridors, following the signs to the cardiac wing, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach that always came with family situations. Even in crisis, there was something about being around my family that put me on edge. I'd learned to trust that instinct over the years. But right now I pushed it down. This was about my father's life. I found Maria in the waiting area outside the cardiac ICU. She looked exactly like someone who'd been crying all night. Red eyes, dishevelled hair, clutching a coffee cup with shaking hands. When she saw me, she rushed over and threw her arms around me. "Thank God you're here," she whispered into my shoulder. "I was so scared you wouldn't make it in time." "How is he?" I pulled back to look at her face. "Have the doctors said anything new? Can I see him?" Maria glanced toward the ICU doors, then back at me. "He's stable for now, but Barbara, before you go in there, there's something we need to discuss, all of us, as a family." That knot in my stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "I just want to see Dad first." "Mum and James are in the family conference room," Maria said, taking my arm. "The doctors want to talk to all of us together about Dad's prognosis. And there are some decisions we need to make. Legal decisions." Legal decisions? My father was fighting for his life and they were talking about legal decisions? But I followed Maria down the hallway, telling myself that maybe this was just how hospitals handled things with families. Maybe there were medical directive forms to sign, insurance papers to review. The family conference room was small and sterile, with a round table surrounded by uncomfortable-looking chairs. My mother was there, looking appropriately devastated, dabbing at her eyes with tissues. James sat beside her, wearing a suit that looked too formal for someone who'd supposedly been called to the hospital in the middle of a medical emergency. "Oh, Barbara," Mum stood up and embraced me, and I could smell her familiar perfume mixed with what might have been stress sweat. "I'm so glad you're here. We need you right now. We need to make some important decisions about your father's care." I sat down, noticing that there was a manila folder on the table in front of the empty chair, clearly meant for me. "What kind of decisions? Where are the doctors?" I thought they were going to explain Dad's condition. James cleared his throat. "The doctors stepped out for a moment, but they'll be back. In the meantime, they asked us to review some paperwork." He pushed the manila folder toward me. "These are forms related to Dad's medical care and some financial preparations we need to make." Financial preparations. Those words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "What do you mean, financial preparations?" "Well," Mum said, wringing her hands, "if something happens to your father, we need to make sure the family is protected. You know how these medical bills can pile up, and there are estate considerations. My father was supposedly dying in the next room, and they were talking about dividing up his estate." I opened the manila folder and my blood pressure spiked as I read the header on the first document. "Transfer of inheritance rights and power of attorney." What is this? I looked up at the three of them, and for the first time, I noticed something that should have been obvious from the moment I walked in. None of them looked like people who'd been crying all night. Mum's makeup was perfect. James's suit was crisp and clean. Maria's dishevelled hair was actually styled in a way that looked deliberately messy. "It's just paperwork," Maria said quickly. "Legal stuff to make sure everything is handled properly if Dad doesn't..." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes again, but I was reading the document now, and the knot in my stomach had turned into full-blown alarm bells. This wasn't medical paperwork. This was a comprehensive transfer of my inheritance rights. Specifically, my rights to my grandfather's trust fund, which I was the primary beneficiary of. The document would transfer those rights to my siblings and give my mother power of attorney over all my financial decisions related to the family estate. This has nothing to do with Dad's medical care. I said slowly, looking up at them. "This is about Grandpa's trust fund." The room went quiet for a moment that stretched too long. Then James leaned forward, his voice taking on a patronising tone I remembered from our childhood. "Barbara, you've been away for so long. You don't understand the financial pressures the family has been under. Dad's medical bills are going to be enormous, and Mum's going to need support. The trust fund that Grandpa left you, it was meant to help the whole family, not just one person." "Grandpa left it specifically to me," I said, my voice getting stronger. "And what does this have to do with Dad's heart attack? Why are we talking about money right now?" Mum started crying harder. "Because we might lose him, Barbara, and if we do, I don't know how I'm going to manage. Your brother has his own family to support. Maria's business is struggling, and you're the only one who's been successful. Surely you can understand that family comes first." Family comes first. The phrase that had been used to manipulate me my entire life. The phrase that had convinced me to pay for James's college when his grades weren't good enough for scholarships. The phrase that had guilted me into lending Maria money for 3 different failed business ventures. The phrase that had kept me sending checks home for years while building my own business from nothing. But something was wrong here, something beyond the obvious wrongness of discussing inheritance while my father was supposedly dying. I looked around the room again, really looked this time, and started noticing details that didn't add up. James kept checking his phone, but not in the way someone waiting for medical updates would. He was checking it like someone waiting for confirmation that a plan was working. Mum's tissues were dry. She was dabbing at her eyes, but there were no actual tears. And Maria kept glancing toward the door, not like she was waiting for a doctor, but like she was making sure no one was coming. "I want to see Dad first," I said, closing the folder. "Before I sign anything, I want to see my father." The 3 of them exchanged a look that lasted just a split second too long. It was James who spoke first. "The doctor said he needs to rest. Maybe after we get this paperwork sorted out." "No," I stood up, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. "I flew 6 hours to get here because I thought my father was dying. I'm going to see him right now." I walked toward the door, but Maria jumped up to block my path. "Barbara, wait. You don't understand how sick he looks. It might be better to remember him the way he was." Remember him the way he was, like he was already dead? That's when it hit me. That's when all the pieces suddenly clicked into place with a clarity that made me feel both sick and furious at the same time. The perfectly timed emotional phone call, the immediate discussion of legal documents before I'd even seen my supposedly dying father. The way all 3 of them looked more nervous than grief-stricken. The way they were trying to keep me away from the ICU. "He's not sick, is he?" The words came out of my mouth before I'd even finished processing the thought. There is no heart attack. The silence in that room was deafening. I watched 3 faces go through identical expressions. Surprise, panic, and then a desperate attempt to maintain the charade. "Barbara, you're upset," Mum said, reaching for me. "You're not thinking clearly. The stress of the flight, the shock. Where is he?" I asked, stepping away from her reach. "Where is my father right now?" "He's in the ICU," James said, but his voice cracked slightly. "Room 314. But like I said, the doctors don't want Then let's go to room 314 right now, I said, moving toward the door. All of us, let's go see my dying father together. And that's when I saw it. That's when Maria made the mistake that confirmed everything I was starting to suspect. She looked at James with an expression of pure panic, and James shook his head almost imperceptibly. It was a tiny gesture, lasting maybe half a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. They weren't trying to protect me from seeing a sick father. They were trying to protect themselves from me discovering that there was no sick father to see. I reached for the door handle, and this time James actually stepped in front of me. Barbara, please. You need to calm down and think about the family. Think about what's best for everyone. Get out of my way, I said quietly. I'm going to see my father. Right now. You can't, Maria blurted out, then immediately looked like she wanted to take the words back. I can't, I repeated. Why can't I see my own father? The three of them stood there like deer caught in headlights, and I realised that this moment right here was their biggest fear. This was the moment their plan could completely fall apart. This was the moment I might discover that they had lured me across the country with a lie specifically designed to manipulate me into signing away my inheritance. But here's what they didn't know about me, what they'd never bothered to learn during all those years when I was building my business from nothing. I had learned to be strategic. I had learned to think 3 steps ahead. And I had learned that when someone is trying to manipulate you, the best response isn't always immediate confrontation. So instead of forcing my way past James, instead of demanding to see my father right that second, I took a deep breath and sat back down at the table. You're right, I said, picking up the manila folder again. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed and scared. Of course I want to do what's best for the family. The relief in the room was almost palpable. Mum started crying again, real tears this time, tears of relief. James relaxed his shoulders. Maria actually smiled. I knew you'd understand, Mum said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You've always been the smart one, Barbara, the one who thinks things through. I opened the folder and pretended to read through the documents more carefully, but my mind was racing. If my father wasn't actually in the ICU, where was he? Was he in on this plan? Or were they planning to tell him some story about why I'd suddenly signed over my inheritance? How long had they been planning this? And most importantly, how was I going to prove what they were doing? This is a lot to process, I said, looking up at them with what I hoped was a confused and overwhelmed expression. Can I have a few minutes to read through everything? Maybe call my lawyer to make sure I understand what I'm signing? Another look passed between the three of them, this one more panicked than the last. Is that really necessary? James asked. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. And with Dad's condition being so critical, it'll just take a few minutes, I said. I want to make sure I'm making the right decision for everyone. You understand, right? This is my entire inheritance we're talking about. Of course, Mum said quickly. Take all the time you need. We'll be right here. But I wasn't planning to stay in that room, and I wasn't planning to call my lawyer, not yet anyway. I was planning to walk out of that room and straight to the ICU to confirm what I already knew. That room 314 was either empty or contained someone who wasn't my father, or contained my father who was perfectly healthy and probably very confused about why his family was telling people he'd had a heart attack. What I was planning to do was gather evidence. what I was planning to do was turn this entire situation around on them in a way they would never see coming. Because if there's one thing I'd learned from building a successful business, it's that knowledge is power. And I was about to get a lot of knowledge about exactly what my family had been planning behind my back. "I'll be back in just a few minutes," I said, standing up with the folder in my hands. "I just need some air to clear my head before I make such an important decision." And as I walked out of that conference room, leaving my 3 family members behind, I could practically feel their anxiety radiating through the walls. They thought they had trapped me, but I was about to show them what a real trap looked like. I walked straight to the elevator, my heart pounding, but my mind crystal clear. As the doors closed, I pulled out my phone and did what I should have done the moment I got that panicked call from Maria. I called St. Joseph's Hospital directly. "Hi, I'm calling to check on a patient," I said when the operator answered. "Robert Martinez. He was admitted last night with a heart attack." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "I'm sorry, but we don't have any patient by that name currently admitted to our facility." "Are you sure? Robert Martinez, admitted around dinner time yesterday with cardiac issues?" "I've checked all our systems, ma'am. No Robert Martinez has been admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital in the past week." I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Phoenix Memorial, Phoenix Baptist, and every other major hospital in the area. Same story everywhere. No Robert Martinez, no heart attack patient matching my father's description. My hands were shaking now, but not from grief, from pure, concentrated rage. I pulled up my phone's recording app and hit record, then slipped the phone into my jacket pocket with the microphone facing out. If my family wanted to play games with legal documents, I was going to make sure I had evidence of every word they said. But first, I needed to know where my father actually was. I called his cell phone. It rang 4 times before he picked up with a cheerful, "Hello, sweetheart. What a nice surprise. How are things in Seattle?" He sounded perfectly fine, better than fine. He sounded like someone who'd just finished a good breakfast and was settling in to read the morning paper. "Dad," I said carefully, "how are you feeling today?" "Feeling? I feel great. Why do you ask? Your mother made her famous pancakes this morning, and I'm thinking about taking a walk around the neighborhood." Beautiful day here in Phoenix. Famous pancakes, a walk around the neighborhood. Not exactly the activities of a man who'd suffered a massive heart attack less than 12 hours ago. "Dad, where are you right now?" "I'm at home, of course. Where else would I be on a Wednesday morning?" "Barbara, is everything okay? You sound worried." At home. My supposedly dying father was at home, planning a neighborhood walk after eating pancakes. "I'm actually in Phoenix," I said. "I flew in this morning. Can I come see you? You're here. That's wonderful. Of course, come over. I'll put on some coffee. What brings you to town?" What brings me to town? His own family had told me he was dying, and he had no idea I was even coming. "I'll be there in about an hour," I said. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" "I'll be right here. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." I hung up and just stood there in that hospital hallway for a moment, processing the full scope of what my family had done. They had fabricated a medical emergency, complete with fake hospital location and coordinated emotional performances, all to trick me into flying across the country and signing away my inheritance. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated exactly how strategic I could be when someone tried to manipulate me. I took the elevator back up to the conference room, my phone still recording in my pocket. When I walked back in, all three of them looked up expectantly. I just need to clarify a few things before I sign, I said, sitting back down and opening the folder. This document transfers my inheritance rights to you three, correct? Well, it's more complicated than that, James said. It's really about pooling family resources to handle Dad's medical expenses but ultimately I would no longer have access to Grandpa's trust fund. The trust fund would be managed collectively for the family's benefit, Mom said. You'd still benefit from it, of course, but I wouldn't have control over it anymore. Right, Maria said quickly, but that's better, isn't it? Less responsibility for you and more security for everyone. I nodded thoughtfully, pretending to consider this. And this power of attorney document gives Mum control over all my financial decisions related to family assets. Just to make things easier, Mum said, you're so busy with your business in Seattle. This way, you don't have to worry about family financial matters. Perfect. They were giving me exactly the confession I needed, with everything being recorded on my phone. Can I ask how long you've been planning this? I said, keeping my voice curious rather than accusatory. Another one of those looks passed between them. James cleared his throat. We've been discussing the family's financial situation for a while, he said carefully. With Dad's health concerns. What health concerns? I interrupted. I mean, before last night. Has Dad been having other issues? Well, Mom said, he's been having some chest pains, and at his age, we're all worried about his heart. Chest pains that apparently hadn't prevented him from eating pancakes and planning neighbourhood walks, but I didn't mention that. So you've all been worried about his health and you thought it would be good to get financial matters sorted out just in case? Exactly, Maria said, looking relieved that I seemed to understand. We just want to be prepared. That makes sense, I said. And when did you decide to call me about the heart attack? Was that something you planned, or was it a spur-of-the-moment decision when Dad actually got sick? I watched their faces carefully. This was the question that would either get them to confess or force them to dig deeper into their lies. James spoke first. When Dad collapsed last night, we knew we had to call you immediately. We couldn't handle a crisis like this without the whole family together. He collapsed at dinner, right? That's what Maria told me. Yes, Mum said quickly, right at the dinner table. It was terrifying. What did you do after he collapsed? Did you call 911 right away? Of course, James said. The paramedics came and brought him straight here. I nodded, continuing to take mental notes of every detail they were giving me. Every lie they told was another piece of evidence I could use against them. And the doctors here at St. Joseph's, what exactly did they say about his condition? That it was touch and go, Maria said. That the next 24 hours would be critical. Which doctors specifically? I'd like to speak with them before I make any major financial decisions. The panic in the room was almost tangible now. Mum started crying again. Barbara, please, she said. Your father could die and you're worried about talking to doctors? This isn't the time for business negotiations. This is about family. There it was again. Family, the magic word they thought would make me stop asking questions. You're absolutely right, I said, closing the folder. This is about family. Which is why I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I pulled out my phone and all three of them tensed up. What are you doing? James asked. I'm calling my lawyer, I said. Like I mentioned before, I just want to make sure I understand everything before I sign. Barbara, there isn't time for lawyers, Maria said desperately. I'm away. Dad could take a turn for the worse at any moment. Then it's even more important that I get legal advice quickly, I said, pretending to dial. This will just take a few minutes. But instead of calling my lawyer, I called my father again, putting the phone on speaker. Hello? Dad's cheerful voice filled the room. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Mom gasped and went completely white. James's mouth fell open. Maria looked like she was going to be sick. Hi, Dad, I said calmly. I'm here at St. Joseph's Hospital with Mom, James, and Maria. They told me you had a heart attack last night. There was a moment of confused silence on the phone. A heart attack? What are you talking about, sweetheart? I feel fine. I'm sitting in my kitchen reading the paper. Why are you at the hospital? I looked around the room at three faces that had gone from panic to pure terror. That's a very good question, Dad. Why am I at the hospital? I have no idea. Barbara, what's going on? Is someone hurt? I'm starting to wonder the same thing, I said. Dad, did you collapse at dinner last night? Collapse? No, of course not. Your mother made pot roast and we had a lovely dinner. Then we watched that detective show she likes and went to bed around 10. Barbara, you're scaring me. What's happening? I ended the call and set my phone down on the table. The silence in that room was deafening. So, I said conversationally, who wants to explain to me what the hell is going on? More silence. Three people who had been so confident in their manipulation just minutes before now couldn't seem to form words. Let me help you out, I continued. You fabricated a medical emergency to trick me into flying here and signing away my inheritance. You coordinated your stories, you chose a hospital, you even had Maria call me crying in the middle of the night for maximum emotional impact. James found his voice first. Barbara, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said, my voice getting harder, and I have it all recorded. I pulled my phone back out and showed them the recording app that had been running the entire time. Every confession, every lie, every attempt at manipulation, all of it recorded. Mum started crying again. But these were different tears. These were tears of someone who had just realized their entire plan had backfired spectacularly. You don't understand the pressure we've been under, she sobbed. James lost his job. Maria's business is failing, and you're the only one who's been successful. We just thought, you thought you could steal from me, I finished. You thought you could use my love for Dad against me to trick me into giving you my inheritance. It's not stealing, James said desperately. We're family. That money should be shared among all of us anyway. That money was left to me specifically by Grandpa. You know why? Because he knew exactly what kind of people you are. I stood up and gathered my things, including the manila folder with their fraudulent documents. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm keeping these documents as evidence. I'm keeping the recording of everything you just confessed to. And I'm going to see my father now, my perfectly healthy father who has no idea his family just tried to rob his daughter. Barbara, wait, Maria pleaded. We can work this out. We don't have to involve lawyers or... Oh, we're way past that, I said. You involved fake medical emergencies and forged legal documents. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is fraud. I walked toward the door, then turned back to look at them one more time. You know what the really sad part is? If you had just asked me for help, if you had been honest about your financial problems, I probably would have helped you, but instead you chose to lie, manipulate, and try to steal from me. I opened the door and paused. By the way, I'm a business consultant. Do you know what that means? It means I specialize in identifying fraud, analyzing deceptive practices, and helping people protect themselves from exactly the kind of scam you just tried to pull on me. The looks of horror on their faces would have been funny if the situation weren't so devastating. Enjoy explaining to Dad why his daughter flew across the country thinking he was dying, I said. I'm sure that will be a fun conversation. I left them sitting in that hospital conference room and walked out of St. Joseph's Hospital, my mind already moving to the next phase of my plan. Because what they didn't know was that this wasn't over, not even close. I drove straight to my father's house, and the reunion was everything it should have been, warm, loving, and completely free of any medical crisis drama. Dad was confused about why I'd thought he was sick, and when I explained what had happened, he was horrified. They told you I had a heart attack? He asked, his face going red with anger. They made you fly here thinking I was dying. That's exactly what they did, Dad. And they tried to get me to sign documents transferring my inheritance to them while I was emotional and scared. My father sat down heavily in his favourite chair, looking older than I'd seen him in years. I don't understand, he said quietly. How could they do something like this? To family? Because they don't see me as family, I said. They see me as a resource. To be exploited. That's when I told him my plan. That's when I explained exactly how I was going to turn their manipulation back on them in a way that would ensure they never tried anything like this again. And my father, bless him, looked at me with pride and said, "Sweetheart, you do whatever you need to do." They made their choice when they decided to lie about my death. Now they can live with the consequences. The next morning, I called a family meeting. I told Mom, James, and Maria that I had thought about everything overnight, and I wanted to discuss a family financial plan that would help everyone. I suggested we meet at Mom and Dad's house for Sunday dinner, just like old times. They were so relieved that I wasn't pressing charges, so grateful that I seemed willing to work with them, that they never questioned why I wanted to involve Dad in the conversation. They probably thought I was going to break the news to him gently, maybe even get him to support their position. What they didn't expect was to walk into that dining room and find my father sitting at the head of the table with a copy of the fraudulent documents I'd been asked to sign, alongside printed transcripts of every conversation I'd recorded at the hospital. What they didn't expect was to see my lawyer sitting next to him. What they definitely didn't expect was the envelope of legal documents that had been prepared specifically for this moment. Documents that would ensure they faced real consequences for what they had tried to do to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The look on their faces when they realized that Dad knew everything, that he had heard the recordings, that he understood exactly what they had tried to do. That was the moment I knew justice was finally within reach. And it was just the beginning of the reckoning they had brought upon themselves.